Now, just as an example, I'm going to give you 3 of these. This is our accounts from Hanken. So numbers of customers up the left-hand side. Most amount of customers we had was not quite 700 box customers. And you can see the curve. This is starting beginning of April. So we did the financial year as our year. And so our customer numbers are at their highest in the Hungry Gap. And then at the time of year when we got the most produce, they dropped down to maybe 3/4. And I'm sure you've all experienced this. Everyone goes on holiday in the summer, or they grow their own stuff, or they think, oh, I'll go to the farmer's market instead of getting my box. And then there's a bit of a dip at Christmas, obviously. But generally, we're looking at the sort of 500 to 700 customers area that we were having, and that's the sort of pattern. And that pattern repeats every year. So we were very aware that we have more customers at the time of year when we potentially have the least amount of produce, if you're not including sort of deep winter, than possibly the rest of the year. So it's important, if you can capitalize on that time. So there's another year. And in this year, we actually upped the production of stuff in the Hungry Gap. And actually the highest earning week was, that's the beginning of May. And this was at a time when we were growing a lot of asparagus, and that we actually really concentrated on producing for that time in the glasshouse. And again, customer numbers right up to sort of 700 boxes a week, and dropped down to like below 500 a week in the summer holidays. And then this one was possibly the best that we managed, and that really leveled off the numbers of, the customer fluctuation is still there. I'm not sure why that dips. That's Christmas. Yeah, that's the same, but we had a dip a bit earlier. Maybe it was in early summer holidays or a weird year. But anyway, the beginning of the year there, you can see that we've got like a massive week, and then generally quite even amounts of output. The monetary value there is probably a bit obsolete, because this is all from like 2012, 2013, 14, 15, 16. All the prices have gone up. But you get an idea of the comparison there. So it's not always simple. Pros and cons of Hungry Gap production. Some obvious pros: produce, income. But on the downside, it can be a lot of work. You've got to use more heat to propagate. You're trying to do a load more work and get a load more crops at a time of year when really you need to be like ready to get out and cultivate when the weather's right. When there is the opportunity to do work, getting prepared for the summer, you want to be on it. And if you're distracted trying to get lots of early crops and having to run around pick, that draws out of that. So it's not just a simple matter of, oh, great, we can grow more early crops. It does have an impact on your overall work schedule and on the whole thing of burnout. It's quite nice to not have to do much in the winter. Whereas if you're trying to pull either end of the season and close up the whole gap, you're just running around like a nutcase all year round, and that's not good for any of us. So it's worth taking that into account. On the weather side, the spring is brilliant for light levels and generally soil water, groundwater. So irrigating isn't a big issue. Light levels are not a big issue. However, temperatures can fluctuate wildly. From certainly in a protected space, they can go up to 30 degrees in March and April, and down to -3. So that's quite a thing to work with. And the weather generally can be just pissing with rain for like 2 months, or it can be dry and sunny like it was this autumn, this spring. It can be really windy. So that works against us basically at that time of year. Another good thing about the spring is soil fertility. Generally, as you come out of winter, everything's like, woohoo, lots of nitrogen. All of the minerals in the soil are available at that time of year. Before, as you move through the season, things start to get a bit exhausted. So that can be a nice time for soil fertility, and generally the soil's easier to manage. If you've got protection, it's got good soil moisture, and it works quite well. However, those spaces are often in demand. So propagation, if you're trying to propagate more at time of year when you're already propagating with your outdoor crops, can be demand for propagation space, and demand for space in the actual protected areas is quite high because you're coming out of winter. A lot of crops, they're starting to tail off and they're starting to bolt, but you're thinking, well, I want to get my courgettes or my cucumbers, my tomatoes, my peppers, I want to get them all in as early as possible. Maybe early May. I mean, if you like us, you had a big glass house, we would start about mid-April because that massive space holds the heat. We didn't heat it, but like the solar capacity of that soil to hold heat is much greater. In a smaller polytunnel, you've got much more surface area to sort of soil volume ratio. Sorry. Yeah. So we would be able to start quite early, but mid-May for me now, working on a smaller scale, is about when I aim to get most of the crops out without risk of frost. But that space is in demand. And then another thing in the spring is that you've got fairly low weed pressure, you've got low pest pressure, you've got fairly low disease, although slugs and aphid can be a problem. I think for most of us, like overwinter lettuces, depending on the season, you can get a flush of aphid in those and be a bit disappointed when you come to pick them in the spring. And slugs generally in this country are an issue in a wet year. So trying to get an early start outdoors, we've all probably experienced, you plant something out, you think, great, got it nice and early, you go and look at it a week later, everything's been decimated. Like I said, weather-wise, it's a tricky time. That's me, my daughter, and a friend in the snow on the 5th of April, 2009. That's basically the beginning of the Hungry Gap. And we had, like 6 inches of snow. This is Javier from Spain helping me dig an irrigation trench. This was at the beginning of lockdown 2020. And it was bone dry. We managed to dig a 2-foot trench without any trouble in heavy clay soil in late March. And he's wearing his sunglasses, but because he's from Spain, he's still wearing trousers. So creating the space. Main way to create space outside would be, if you want an early start, you can't guarantee on cultivating the soil unless you've got lovely light sandy soils. For us, we're on heavy clay. So certainly any sort of early cultivation is out of the question because we're using tarps, we're no dig, we're putting down a layer of compost and broad forking, try not to trample all over it too much. You want to basically clear it of weeds and you want to try and dry it out a bit. So you can use sheet plastic, most of the water will run off, but actually we go for caterpillar tunnels. They're a bit more work, but it's a much nicer space to work in, and then you get that longevity of extra protection. And I think caterpillar tunnels are brilliant, having worked in a glass house for a long time and now being down to like a sort of 17 metre by 9 metre polytunnel. I put up 3 caterpillar tunnels through the year and they're great. And I've got 50 teenagers that I work with and they put it up, which is even greater. And they enjoy it, like they're building, It's not boring old cabbages, it's like building stuff. So combined with the cover, the caterpillar tunnel warms up the soil and keeps it dry, which is amazing that time of year. This spring, could have probably done it without them, but you never know what's going to happen. On a larger scale, like a winter kill green manure would work the same. Mustard, buckwheat, mature phacelia, something that's just the frost's going to kill it off, and then in the spring you've got like just dead stuff, and then you don't have to worry too much about getting in and cultivating. You should be able to just either rake it off or plant straight into it. Fleeces work quite well for an early start. I'm sure everybody uses fleeces outdoors in spring. Amazingly effective. I mean, I'm always surprised at how effective a decent fleece is, EnviroMesh or just the sort of more woven fleece. But outside, certainly slug prevention strategies are, I'm not going to go into how to control slugs, but you've got to really be on it with the slugs. So how do we make efficient use of protected space? So the previous slide was really about making space outdoors, getting an early start. This is more about how you're going to slip something in between those winter crops all running to seed and your summer crops coming in. So previous experience is really important. So I'm hoping everybody keeps good records, sowing records, planting records, inputs records, harvesting records. From all those, you can look back and go, okay, where are the opportunities here to fit in another crop? And you've got to try and fit that into your rotation. Once you've worked out something that works, you've got to squeeze that in. Obviously thinking about rotating brassicas, alliums, solanaceae, all those things. You can do intercropping. I know Andy Divon's very good at this. A lot of people have got good at it. You've got to be really careful about competition between, maybe if you were to put spinach in and then plant your tomatoes into your spinach bed, you've got to be really careful about competition. I mean, it's difficult to tell until it's too late sometimes that your tomatoes have really slowed down because they're trying to put roots out where there's a spinach crop. And we do peas, often a row of peas, and we sow carrots either side because they all go in late February, early March. And often in a good year, they'll do great, but sometimes the peas do really well and the carrots struggle, or vice versa. But that's a risk we take to make good use of the space. You can sacrifice a few crops. So when we had the glasshouse, once we hit sort of mid to late March, we'd have so much herbet and like oriental brassicas, we would often just pull them out and chuck them on the compost heap rather than trying to sell them, to create the space to get radishes in, to get carrots in, to get spinach in. And sometimes that's a difficult thing to do, but when you realize the value you get from the early stuff that you've planted, it can make a lot of sense, especially if you've kind of had the value of the crops earlier in the winter, and at that point you're kind of struggling to sell them all. Depends on how much space you've got. So for a lot of people, they're like under what they could sell for most of the winter, and then by the time they get to that abundant point at the end of the winter, when the sun comes out and all your protected stuff's going for it, then you're hitting the level that you want to be at. So you wouldn't want to be putting stuff out. But for some people, you're actually getting more produce than you can sell. And lastly, you can actually, if you look at the actual value of your summer crops, it's often surprisingly low for the amount of effort we put in. Tomatoes are quite good, cucumbers can be quite good, but a lot of other stuff is not that much of an earner. You know, it's great to have, people love it, it earns its keep. But as you'll see in a moment, a lot of our value that we got at Hanken was through leafy crops. And by actually concentrating on those a bit more, you're getting like proper cash crops rather than just trying to create too much of a variety and then running around all day trying to service that, and then at the end of the year being very disappointed in what you've actually earned. So a couple of points on caterpillar tunnels. There's the setting them up early and planting them up early. That's great. They do a good job, especially on our heavy clay soils. If you've got heavy soil, they do the double whammy of warming and drying at the same time. Planting, what I do, because we have the Easter holidays in April, so the kids will go away for 3 weeks, we get one tunnel planted up before the holidays, and I kind of look after it over the holidays, and that will be all or some of kale, chard spinach, peas, spring cabbages, lettuce, kohlrabi, beetroot, fennel, coriander. But the other thing is you can take pressure off your permanent protected space by putting up a caterpillar tunnel for summer crops. So we do cucumbers, courgettes, French dwarf beans, basil. The first lot of that all goes into a caterpillar tunnel, which means it's not in the protected space, which means we can put more hungry gap crops in the polytunnel. And then that's normally out and done by August, which then means we plant it up with winter brassicas, which again are for the hungry gap. So hungry gap kale, spring cauliflowers, purple sprouting broccoli, and some spring greens, and net the caterpillar tunnel so the pigeons can't get to them. And then they go all the way through the winter and give us a crop in the spring. Ideally not too much in April, but in May when the kids come back after the Easter holidays. And I'm still tweaking that, but there's a lot in that technique that I feel could be very useful. Yeah. So what the summer crops? Oh, the overwintered ones were hungry gap kale or red Russian, which I'll touch on in a moment if I don't run out of time. Spring greens, so like April pointy spring green type. Cauliflower and purple sprouting broccoli. They just get decimated by pigeons where we are. We're right on the edge of woodland. Wood pigeons come in over the Christmas holidays, decimate everything. So without a net, they wouldn't do very well, yeah. No, we're in a walled garden. It's really, yeah. Yeah, the caterpillar tunnels, actually, I've got a lot more confidence in them now working this site for a few years, but I've had bad experience with caterpillar tunnels going, I won't go into it, but yeah, trauma. So what we do is we set up, there's a couple of expert caterpillar tunnel builders, Greta and Tegan, putting up a caterpillar tunnel on the 15th of March. And you can see the tarp there that's been keeping it weed-free over the winter. And then planting up towards the end of March, get the plastic on, tie it all down. And that's 29th of April, just when we're coming back from Easter holidays. Everything's kind of sort of getting there. And by the 15th of May, we've got a crop. We've moved the plastic, we've moved the tunnel off, and we've moved it across for the next lot of stuff. So I'm just going to go through some produce that we do and go into a little bit more detail on the individual crops. But first, we're just going to look at stored produce. So I'm going to look at potatoes, carrots, and onions briefly, and squash, getting those through a bit further through the winter, rather than just putting up with manky carrots and sprouting potatoes, or buying them in from somebody who's got like controlled atmosphere storage. What you can do to either store your own produce for longer, or when you buy stuff in, keep it good for a bit longer. And then I'll look at two types of crops, which is overwintered and perennial crops, and then early sown crops. And there's a list of those there. I think this presentation is going to be available, hopefully. And so that's just listing a lot of the crops. The ones in italics, I'm not going to go into much detail on at all, but the others we'll have a quick look at. So storage, potatoes want to be between 5 and 10 degrees. If they go below 5, they start to become much sweeter. That might sound good, but it means they don't cook very well. They haven't got the starchy fluffiness. Most people don't like potatoes that have been stored that cold. Over 10 degrees, and they're basically going to start sprouting. They want to be dry. We want a bit of airflow, and ensuring that there's no ethylene present. So ripening fruit and veg gives off ethylene. That ripens other fruit and veg. And so by storing potatoes not next to ripening bananas and not next to apples, you'll ensure that it's not triggering off their ripening process. Onions, quite similar storage to potatoes. They can put up with a bit more warmth, but not a lot. Again, dry, good airflow. And onions are a crop that do benefit from controlled atmosphere storage. So if you've actually sold all your onions by Christmas, you're not trying to store them through to the hungry gap. Buying them in is a really good option if somebody's storing them well, because it's amazing how long bought-in onions keep in the hungry gap without sprouting, especially if you're keeping them cool and dry. I'm not going to go into controlled atmosphere storage. Most of us just don't have that as an option, but the people you're buying in from, and the wholesaler often do. So knowing like how they're storing it can help you understand how then you should store it to keep that going for longer. Carrots want to be really cold, not frozen, but about as cold as you can get before frozen, so more like dairy temperatures. And they, unlike onions and potatoes, they want to be humid and they want to be sealed in. They don't need much airflow. But they do need to be checked for disease. Sclerotina can be an issue. And so regularly checking your stored carrots for problems, because otherwise it just spreads through the stored crop. Again, they will benefit from controlled atmosphere storage, but temperature is pretty adequate. And then squash varieties, the key with squash. Hubbard types, crown prints, they will keep all the way through till late winter, early spring if they're properly stored. And the optimal storage for squash is between 12 and 15 degrees. So they don't really want to go in a cold store. They don't want to be in like warm storage. They do need to be ripened properly when you take them out of the field. Underripe squash will not store for long, and they do not want any damage. So harvest quality is really key to squash, but also to all veg, even onions. Like they don't want to be bruised because they won't store for as long. So being really careful harvesting is very key to long-term storage. And going back to squash, about 60% relative humidity. If you can store squash at like 13, 14 degrees at 60% humidity, they'll keep for as long as that variety is sort of designed to keep for. So let's have a look at the veg, the sown veg. So this is, again, some figures. This is a 3-year total, which is why it's £30,000 at the bottom. But that's a list of all the crops that we were selling during the Hungry Gap over a 3-year period. Same 3 years as those other graphs I showed you. And you can see how much salad, how much of a cash crop salad is. And it was for us because we could just sell salad at that time of year. People were asking us for it and we couldn't supply. We used to sell 1,000 salad packs to Langridge in London at that time of year. We were supplying Infinity Foods shop. We were doing 600 boxes every week. Everyone would have a salad bag every week. So salad was the big earner. Spinach is kind of like half of salad. And then you've got like spring greens, pretty high, sort of fifth one down. Chard, the featured ones, chard, coriander, spring onions, leeks, and asparagus. So they're like the main ones. And then sort of middle of the road, sort of rocket, lettuce, pak choy, courgette, radish, mange tout were very worthwhile. And then other ones that were less value here, but mainly because it was either the season, they were just at the beginning of their season, or they're just a low value crop, but they're like a loss leader maybe. Basil, French beans, cucumber, carrot, rhubarb, and fennel. So that's the list of the crops that we were able to produce under glass at Hankham, and their relative sort of value in the months from the beginning of April to sort of early mid-June. Yes, Jill. Both. Yeah, we lumped them together, herbet and true spinach, which was like an accounting thing. I would love to have had them separate, but that's how we did it at the time. I'll go on to true spinach though, because true spinach is, this time of year is the best time to grow true spinach, basically. Usually does really well. It can be a bit of a tricky thing to grow in the summer, can bolt very quickly. In the winter, it often doesn't get through. It'll get some kind of blight and aphid will get in and spread viruses around. But in the spring, it just seems to go like the clappers, and everybody likes true spinach. And especially if you've been feeding them herbet for the rest of the year, it can be a nice relief from that. So the easy win of salad for us, easy is like relative to other things. So our salad mix at that time of year would be lettuce, rocket. We'd do wild rocket and rucola. Rucola would be from seed because the overwinter stuff's all bolted by then. But wild rocket holds really well in the spring. And wild rocket was one of our best Hungry Gap crops. You'd plant it late. Actually, I'll go into wild rocket in a moment because that's coming up. I'll just skim through this. Boar's blood, baby leaf beet, nice dark red leaf beet. That would go through the winter and then really come into its own in the spring, around about sort of April time. Generally wouldn't really keep through till May. It's kind of bolting by then, but give us good leaves, good colour in the salad at that point. All the oriental leaves, most of them have all bolted by the Hungry Gap, but the next sowing are very quick to establish. Lots of baby leaf. Oh, battery's running low. Where's the charger? Oh, thank you. Should be plugged in. Yeah, so Mizuna, red frills, tatsoi, pak choy, green streaks, even like red mustard, giant red mustard if you pick it small, kind of nice and spicy. But there's so many good varieties of oriental leaves out there now. I don't think anyone's really growing giant red mustard anymore. And then baby kale and chard leaves, we wouldn't really grow for salad. We grow them for the mature crop. But if we were wanting a little bit more variety in the salad, maybe for certain customers, we might just go and pick the baby leaves off the early crops, and that could be quite effective. So lettuce, large variety is the main thing because at this time of year you can pretty much grow any type of lettuce under glass or polytunnel. But the overwinter stuff will often keep quite well into that time of year. So we generally just grew green oak leaf types, like Avenir at the moment is a good one. I think we were growing like Kiribati or something back then. But we would grow those through the winter. Often the quality of those through winter can be very variable, but we plant them quite late and they'd stay quite small. And then by the time you get to March, they're starting to bulk up. You start to get multiple picks off them. And there's some crops that we will have had 3 picks of loose leaf off one lettuce. Then it bulks up and then you chop the whole thing and sell the head. And that's a high value crop. And the spring sown ones, we would start with ones that weren't green oak leaf, even though they do really well because all the overwinter ones are doing well. So we want more variety. We want like the red Lolo type, the loose leaf Salanovas, and Cos. And then we would start coming as the green oak leaves are starting to go to seed that have come through the winter. Then we bring back in the green oak leaf. But the main thing with the lettuce is that you've got a really good paced sowing schedule. You're not too tempted to rush in too quick with too many, because when you're doing cut and come again, it's very difficult to predict how much volume you're going to get, because it's stuff with regrowing just as the next crop's coming in. You're thinking, oh God, should I pick the cut and come again, or should I start the new one? And so, just getting that schedule, being really disciplined about not overdoing it early, and then making sure that you're filling the gaps that are going to be created later is very important. That can only really come with experience on your particular plot, with your particular varieties you're growing, but you've got to keep an eye on that. Wild rocket, really good time of year if it's a very difficult thing to grow. In my experience, most of the year, it's either flea beetle or it runs to seed. But in the spring, if you overwinter it, it comes really good in the spring and you can get 2 or 3 cuts off it before it starts to go to seed. So we would sow it mid-September in modules, plant it out under protection in October, keep it well weeded. For some reason, wild rocket just does not seem to like weeds very much at all, which is another reason why it's difficult to grow in the summer. Even over winter, we'd find all sorts of things trying to grow in around wild rocket. I have no idea why wild rocket seems to just attract weeds, but the harvest is very abundant. And then as that's starting to go to seed, your early sown rucola is coming in, so you can get continuity of rocket all the way through the whole year pretty much. True spinach, the best time of year for the real thing. It's a bold statement. We would module sow it. It does really well direct sown, but in the spring you can get away with module sowing it, but you need to sow 1 seed to get 1 plant. If you sow more than 1 seed, you thin them out. You only want to be planting 1 plant. If you're multi-sowing, they don't like it for some reason. They like to have their own space, do their own thing. So we'd sow like mid-February on heat. Again, heat's really important for germinating spinach. It will germinate fine, patchy over time, but if you give them the right temperature, they all come up. And the seed have got to be fresh. Old spinach seed are a bit unpredictable. And even overwinter crops can do well if they've managed to dodge getting overly aphid-ridden or the weird kind of viruses and blights that spinach can get. They can go really well into April, depending on the variety. So if you want a spinach that crops in the winter, you need something fast growing. But if you want a spinach that's going to come good in the spring and not go under seed, you need like a summer variety. Summer varieties like now, what we've got like Tundra, they will grow much slower. They will put up with the frost, no problem. They'll put up with the cold, but they just won't go to seed. The reason they won't go to seed is because they're slow growing. So you won't get much in the winter, but springtime they can be really good. Spinach is not a stress-tolerant crop. A lot of things will trigger it off to run to seed or to go yellow. So it's one of those, just if you learn how to grow it well, this is the time of year when you're really going to get the results. There's a variety called Palco. I don't know if that's still around. There seems to be some more, but that was a nice variety while we had it. It's a decent bed of Palco. So then spring greens were another one. So salads like top of the value list, spinach next, spring greens. People like brassicas, generally speaking, and they like a cabbage. They don't mind a loose leaf cabbage, but they kind of like it if it's hearting up a bit. Everyone likes the nice white coleslaw cabbage. So trying to get a cabbage that hearts up a bit as early as possible is kind of tricky. The loose leaf collard greens types are fine, but you've got a lot of loose leaf brassicas that you can grow, and if you can get ahead, then that's a winning contribution to the Hungry Gap crop. So we would grow under protection. We would plant pretty late, like late November in the glass house. That sounds a little bit too late to most people, but if you've got a fairly mature cabbage plant and you put it in the ground then, tends to survive. For us, it survives as long as you haven't got big slug problems. So something like Pixie or April. I'm not sure if they're available in organic seed anymore. I save my own seed from Pixie, but yeah, you'd have to get a derogation for those. But they will give you greens through April, and going into May, they'll start to heart up and give you like a pointy type cabbage. For outdoor crops, you plant sort of late July from a June sowing, and that will give you a similar sort of season to the indoor ones, but it'll take a bit longer for them to heart up. Again, Pixie or April, they do fine outside as long as you haven't got a slug problem and as long as you keep the pigeons off them. For the early crops, you want something fast growing like an F1 Caraflex, sowing them in early February, planting under polytunnel, caterpillar tunnel, glass house, and you'll get greens from those pretty quick from sort of April, May, but you won't get much of a heart until June. So they're like borderline hungry gap, but you get really good spring greens from them, like super tender. They want good spacing though. You can't like cram them in. If they're going to get big in the spring, it needs that like minimum 35 centimeter spacing, ideally a bit more, so more like 40 centimeters. And really firming in the roots will encourage up the heart. If you plant them into loose soil, they won't heart up as well. Any overwinter crop wants ideally to be in like a well-drained soil. Nothing really likes sitting with its roots soggy. We managed to grow them in our heavy clay soil, but we're on a bit of a slope and we've got good organic matter. And they seem to do all right most years. So that one is on the left is Pixie. That's 29th of April. So they're just starting to heart up. We've cleared the purple sprouting broccoli and the cauliflowers from either side of it. But that's under the net that went over the caterpillar tunnel and kept the pigeons off. Yep. Cool. Perfect. Till the very end. So no time for questions. Some time for questions. Okay. So Caraflex over here is sort of the dark green strip up the middle there. And that's 24th of May, sown in spring, planted under a caterpillar tunnel, and then the plastic comes off as soon as it's nice and warm. And then there's some other varieties in the glass house, Pixie, Pixie, Advantage, and Caraflex. Don't even get Advantage anymore, but that was a good overwinter spring heading variety. So then what else? Asparagus, that was quite a high value crop for us. Under glass, that's 6th of April. We did about 450, 500 square meters of asparagus, varieties backlim. It's not an early variety. If you're doing asparagus and protected cropping, you don't want an early variety. It sounds counterintuitive, but you want asparagus to have a dormant period, otherwise it struggles. And so because of the extra heat under glass, you put in like a mid-season or even a late season variety. It still comes earlier than the outside asparagus. The main advantage of doing it in protection is that you've got weed control. Organic asparagus growers really struggle with weeds because it's unpredictable. You can cultivate to a degree, but it's very difficult to know how deep the crowns are. You can pile it up, but yeah, perennial weeds, annual weeds are a big problem. Under glass, you can control the irrigation. You also get a much healthier crop because it's really a dry climate plant. And so it's not sitting soggy. This is a little graph. The green line is the peak yield in the best years. The blue line is how it started. So we got like an early crop, but then we didn't pick the smaller spears. So that dropped off pretty quick because you want the plant to be healthy and bulk up. And then later, as the crop's starting to finish its kind of 10 to 12 year life cycle, we're getting like a double peak, and then it is tailing off quite early. But wholesale value per week averaging about sort of 250 to 200 quid. But yeah, 3,000 a year. Yeah, about £3,000 a year from 480 square meters. Chard, coriander, parsley, pak choi. I'm not going to go into them too much. There's a slide there just to show that they can be grown at that time of year. And the sowing times are pretty predictable. But the parsley will be an overwintering crop of curly type like Green Pearl, and it comes good in April before it goes to seed. Most of the other ones are just sown as you would any other crop, but just a bit earlier. We would sow overwinter onion sets, and that will give us an early June crop of onions, so green onions. So Thor, I think that variety is, but Radar is the sort of standard. They do quite well under glass. Spring onions, you can sow them in the autumn for a sort of winter spring crop. You can sow them very late. You can sow them very early. They're kind of unpredictable. They're very weather dependent. But if you get like 2 or 3 crops successionally, you get spring onions in the Hungry Gap for sure. And then red Florence, which is a lovely onion, struggles really to come bang in the Hungry Gap, but towards the end of it, you can get a crop of red Florence green onions. Leeks, look for a late variety, so organically Bandit's the classic, but there are other ones out there. It's slower to bolt. You sow it later, you plant it later, you can plant them closer together. You just want to get them through the winter really, and then they bulk up in the spring. We've got a nice box of leeks there. One of the kids did eat a leek this week. Seasonal, Seasonal. And there's where we're picking a late crop leeks. You can see the amount of weeds that are growing in it by that point, so it can be quite a labor-intensive pick. And we weren't able to control weeds that early in the year, so we did used to undersow in a way that would allow us to control what those weeds were going to be, and they're going to be useful weeds. So something like clover grass mix in September. And this is my favorite, elephant garlic. Really good green garlic. If you want to do green garlic in the Hungry Gap, use a big variety Spanish elephant garlic. It's actually more related to leek than it is garlic, but it basically has that flavor. It's much milder. It pulps up beautifully, creates a lovely emulsive pulp that you can use in pestos and aiolis, and it's not overpowering in the way that standard garlic is, and that comes like bang in the Hungry Gap. But you've got these 3 different stages. So the first year are tiny little bulbs, and then the first true year is like a single bulb, and then that becomes the multiple cloves. But yeah, I recommend that to anyone. Okay, kale, overwinter, red Russian, Hungry Gap will give you a spring crop. Everything else just bolts. If you can keep the pigeons off it. They're often quite poor quality through the winter. Don't look great, but they can come really good in the spring once it warms up. And you harvest the tips to encourage lots of side shoots and pick the shoots basically. Spring sown kale, again, sort of not so much Hungry Gap, but red Russian's good for spring sown, but you can get Cavallonero. You can get the other types, but we usually have so much green curly, red curly, autumn and winter that we don't bother. We just do Cavallonero and red Russian in the spring. Get a mate for a May crop. And then that's a bigger crop in the glass house. Giaglo Nero, red Russian, black magic on the 13th of May. I think we've already started picking that, just the large leaves from around the outside. Peas are a great one. Monge 2 sugar snap. I wouldn't bother growing podding peas unless you've really got a market for them. Anything that you can pick and eat whole, large variety, so it's not too much of a fiddle. Oregon sugar pod, the classic sugar snap or snow pea. Tall varieties, kind of difficult to manage, but they're super abundant, super early. I tend to now go for Nairobi, I think it is, that's just grows about this high, because it doesn't shade the other crops that are coming through in the spring. So in the polytunnel, you have a nice tall crop, but then either side of it's really struggling for light. And they're a really good thing to pop in after the first lot of brassicas have gone to seed. There's some crops of Monge 2 and sugar snap. Radish, I'm not going to spend loads of time on this, but we use a Johnny 6-row seeder, but converted it to 3 rows. And we get those in mid-February, every 2 weeks, do a bed of radish. And then you've got continuity of radish all the way through the Hungry Gap. Anything which is like not green leaf in the Hungry Gap is going to be valuable. You can grow it without weeding, but it does benefit from a little hoe at some point. And then purple sprouting broccoli is a classic, but you really got to like work out what the varieties are, because you've got early purple sprouting that's usually all done and dusted before April. And so later ones, there's a variety called Cardinal, it's non-organic seed. But we actually found that last year, the one from Tamar just sold as purple sprouting broccoli. It wasn't Sante. Actually did really good through April. So it can be a bit random. But in the past, they used to sell it as early, mid, and late sprouting. But now you have to look a bit closer at the variety. And then this was an experiment with cauliflowers I did last year, and I'm doing again this year. These are from King's F1 non-organic untreated seed, Oreo and Owlsmere. And they gave good heads on the 24th of April and the 6th of May, outside under a caterpillar tunnel frame that had been netted against pigeons. Carrots are a tricky one. I'm not great at growing carrots, I'll admit that. But we used to get quite nice bunches by the time we got to June. You could get, if you know how to grow carrots, you're good at growing carrots, you can get them earlier. You can also keep them going over winter for a long time. But even a little bunch of pathetic carrots in the spring is quite welcome to anyone. Florence fennel can be grown really good, actually, really nice crop in the spring, nice small bulbs. They don't get too stressed out, but they do need to be in a polytunnel or protected. They don't do so well outside, even under a caterpillar tunnel. They tend to be a bit late. And baby beetroot, but people often are a bit bored of beetroot by April because they've been having it all winter. So you have to be a little bit careful how much you give them. Yeah. Let's go. What we got? Like courgettes. We did a nice early crop of courgettes. Heated space can be also useful. But again, most people can't really afford to heat space. But what we did find is that climbing French beans and courgettes and cucumbers, if you can get the temperature to stay above 12 degrees, they can do pretty well. And certainly they come in like 2 or 3 weeks earlier than other crops. And then the end of the hungry gap is all about broad beans, strawberries. That's like the end of it. They're not classically a hungry gap crop. They're like the sign that the hungry gap is over. Hooray. And just a little touch of the cap to flowers. Plenty of flowers available in the hungry gap. It's a good income stream. Everybody's thinking summer's here because there's some sunny days. So if you can give them a bunch of flowers when they can't have nice veg, be happy. And we also had some, we go and harvest wild garlic and King Strephania mushroom. We've got a bed thanks to Tokyo. Had some nice mushrooms off that bed in April. So, last of all, if I was going to start another project, which I probably won't, it would be to rent a large glasshouse on the south coast and just grow from September to June. And forget July and August. Just a thought. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pete. We got a few minutes for a question or two.
Hi, 2 quick questions. One, how do you design like a nice salad mix? How do you know what's going to be tasty and look good and what they want? And 2 is, do you grow anything with your asparagus? It seems like having it in a permanent bed, it's quite a lot of space. Do you put other crops with it?
So on the asparagus, I had thought about that, but we didn't because one of the reasons we grew asparagus is because we had loads of space. And so we didn't really need to squeeze extra crops in. I'll be really interested to hear if anybody has done that. And I reckon it's probably possible, but it'd be something like maybe radishes that you can just get in and out quite quick. Nothing too long term and nothing with too big a root system. Otherwise, it will compete with the asparagus. On the salad, I usually go for like three aspects in a salad bag, which is taste, texture, and color. So you definitely want some like as many different colors of leaves in there for the eye. From the taste point of view, you don't want too much boring stuff. Like lettuce is great, but you want some spicy stuff and some bitter stuff, maybe some sweet, crunchy stuff if you can. Texture, frizzy stuff, smooth stuff, crunchy stuff. So it's like, for me, it's all about the experience that the customer's going to have. And then you've got to work back from that to your cropping plan. It's never perfect, but sometimes we'll find ourselves picking like just a few little red leaves off some scraggy little bits of beetroot that are coming up, or some knackered old chicory, and that just makes it like, and it's worth spending the time sometimes if you've got lots of bulk of Mizuna, green oak leaf, and like Salanova barlek or something, and you put that all in, and then you just sprinkle a few other bits in there. I mean, barlek's great as a Salanova because it's red anyway, but it's not got the, I don't think it's got like the best flavour. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Dom.
What have you got against turnips?
Yeah. We were never able to sell them. We don't do restaurants. Our customers never were like, oh yeah, more turnips, please. We could even sell kohlrabi better than turnips, which I put on there. But yeah, turnips, like definitely a good Hungry Gap crop. But most of our customers, we did the purple top Milan. We thought they looked lovely. They're a little bit flat, but people were like, oh, I don't know what to do with them. But this was like maybe 10 years ago when people were much more stupid. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, the green one. White. Okay, just round. Okay. Okay. There you go. Well, I was really hoping we'd have enough time to like throw some ideas around, but my presentation took longer than I thought, as most people.
Anybody else? You know what?
Yeah, with asparagus. Pansies. Oh, nice. For like edible flowers. Yeah, yeah. Viola tricolor is really good for that. Does anyone else think that violas taste like dentist water? Why is that? Right. More research needed.
Well, I think that was a fantastically dense talk and so much information. I was writing like crazy because I've been going for 30 years, but I'm still learning off this guy. And there must be a book here, Pete, or at least a pamphlet for the OGA like you did with the irrigation, because I think, you know, many of us could really benefit from this, because Hungry Gap is always the fly in the ointment with the season. So that was just incredible. I've never seen such a good exposition of the Hungry Gap as that. So thank you, Pete. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.